The highway stretched before him, a ribbon of asphalt unspooling under a moonless sky. Miles passed in a blur, the drone of the engine a lullaby against the silence of the night. Fatigue gnawed at Jack's eyelids, the road ahead wavering under the harsh glare of the headlights. He needed a break. A weathered sign materialized out of the darkness, barely visible in the gloom. Last chance rest stop, 2 miles. Jack gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles bone white. 2 more miles. He could make it, he had to. A wave of dizziness washed over him, the sign blurring for a moment before snapping back into focus. His body screamed for rest. Jack pulled the 18-wheeler off the highway, the air brakes sighing as the truck lumbered to a stop. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, broken only by the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. He was alone. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He stepped out of the truck, the air thick and heavy with the smell of diesel and something else, something vaguely metallic and unpleasant. He stretched, his joints popping in protest after hours of driving. The rest stop was deserted, the asphalt cracked and overgrown with weeds. A sense of unease settled over him. The restroom building stood at the far end of the lot, a low-slung brick structure shrouded in shadow. A single flickering fluorescent light cast long, distorted shadows across the cracked asphalt. Jack hesitated, his gut churning with a primal fear he couldn't explain. He forced himself forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant chirping of crickets and the whisper of wind through the trees that bordered the rest stop. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if he were wading through thick mud. He reached the restrooms, the air around him growing colder, the metallic tang in the air stronger. He pushed open the door, the hinges groaning in protest. The stench hit him first, stale urine, vomit, and something else, something sickly sweet and rotten. He flipped the light switch, but the bulb only flickered weakly, casting the room in a dim, flickering light. He could barely make out the graffiti-covered walls, the broken mirror above the sink, the dark stain on the floor that looked suspiciously like dried blood. Jack took a hesitant step inside, his hand hovering near the can of pepper spray on his belt. The door slammed shut behind him with a resounding boom, his heart leaping into his throat. He spun around, adrenaline surging through him, but there was nothing there. Just the empty restroom, the flickering light, the deepening shadows. He tried the door again, but it wouldn't budge. It was stuck, jammed, locked. Panic welled up inside him, cold and clammy. He rattled the doorknob, but it was no use. He was trapped. A sound, soft and low, drifted from the far stall. It was a whisper, barely audible, but undeniably human. Jack froze, every muscle in his body tense. He listened intently, his breath catching in his throat. There it was again, the whisper, closer this time, filled with an unfathomable sadness. He took a tentative step towards the stall, his hand reaching for the pepper spray. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling. "Is someone in there?" The only response was the echo of his own voice bouncing off the grimy tiles. He reached the stall, his hand shaking as he pushed open the door. It swung open with a creak, revealing an empty stall. Relief washed over him, brief and fleeting. He was just tired, he told himself. His mind was playing tricks on him. He turned to leave, and that's when he saw it. A single solitary shoe lying on the floor in the corner of the stall. It was a child's shoe, a small pink sneaker, scuffed and worn. It looked so out of place, so utterly wrong in this desolate, grimy restroom. He reached down, picking up the shoe, his fingers brushing against the worn fabric. It was cold, deathly cold, like it had been pulled from an icebox. A chill ran down his spine, sending goosebumps erupting over his skin. As he turned the shoe over in his hand, he noticed something else. A faint, shimmering light emanating from the bottom of the sole. It pulsed softly, like a tiny heartbeat, casting an eerie glow on the grimy floor. Section 5. Face to face with fear. The light grew brighter, spreading outwards from the shoe, engulfing the stall in an unnatural luminescence. Jack shielded his eyes, his heart pounding against his ribs. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through him, making his teeth chatter. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the light vanished. Jack lowered his hand, blinking away the afterimages. Standing before him, in the center of the stall, was a figure. It was tall and skeletal, its form shrouded in darkness, but he could make out the faint outline of a tattered cloak and a pair of glowing red eyes that bored into him with an ancient, malevolent hunger. He stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. Fear, raw and primal, surged through him, paralyzing him. He wanted to scream, but the sound died in his throat. The figure took a step towards him, its skeletal fingers reaching out, and Jack knew with a terrifying certainty that this was no ordinary being. The stench of decay filled the air, suffocating him. He was trapped, cornered, with nowhere to run. The figure moved closer, its skeletal face inches from his own, and a voice, raspy and filled with malice, whispered in his ear, "You're mine now." Section 6. Trapped in the nightmare. Jack jolted awake, his heart hammering in his chest, sweat soaked through his shirt, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was back in his truck, the engine idling softly, the familiar scent of diesel filling the cab. It was still night, the moon hidden behind a veil of clouds. The rest stop cast in an eerie, almost dreamlike glow. He looked around, his mind struggling to reconcile the nightmare with reality. The child's shoe was gone. The figure, the voice, the terror, all gone. He was alone. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by fatigue and the solitude of the open road? He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. It had felt so real, the fear, the stench, the glowing red eyes. He could still feel the coldness of the child's shoe in his hand, the weight of the entity's gaze upon him. He shook his head, trying to clear the lingering images from his mind. It was just a dream, a bad dream. He needed to get some rest, find a proper truck stop, somewhere with people, with light. Section 7. Waking to terror. He reached for his thermos, his hand trembling, and that's when he saw it. Lying on the passenger seat, nestled amongst his maps and logbooks, was the child's shoe. The pink sneaker, scuffed and worn, just as he had seen it in his dream. The faint, pulsing light emanated from the sole, casting an eerie glow on the worn leather of the seat. Panic surged through him, cold and suffocating. This wasn't a dream, it was real. The figure, the voice, the shoe, it was all real. He fumbled for the door handle, his fingers slipping on the cold metal. He had to get out of here. Now. As he threw open the door, the truck cab was flooded with an unnatural light. He looked up, his blood turning to ice. Standing in the middle of the deserted rest stop, bathed in an ethereal glow, was the figure. It was taller now, its form more defined, its skeletal fingers tipped with claws that glinted in the moonlight. The red eyes burned into him, filled with a cold, calculating malice. He was trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The figure took a step towards the truck, its skeletal jaw opening in a silent scream. Section 8. Back on the road. Jack slammed the truck into gear, the engine roaring in protest. He spun the wheel, tires spitting gravel, and floored the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, narrowly missing the figure that now stood in the middle of the road, its skeletal arms outstretched, its glowing red eyes fixed on him. He didn't dare look back. He just drove, the engine screaming, the truck shuddering under the strain. He had to get away. He had to escape the nightmare. He sped down the highway, the wind whipping through the open window. The image of the figure burned into his mind. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. The rest stopped, the figure, the shoe, all gone, vanished into the night. He was safe, for now. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his heart still pounding against his ribs. He didn't slow down, didn't stop, not until the first rays of dawn pierced through the darkness, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. Section 9. The Haunting Memory. He pulled into a crowded truck stop, the sounds and smells of life a welcome contrast to the eerie silence of the rest stop. He stumbled out of the truck, his legs shaky, his body still buzzing with adrenaline. He needed coffee, strong coffee. He walked into the diner, the chatter of voices and the sizzle of bacon a soothing balm to his frayed nerves. He sat down at the counter, his hands shaking as he reached for a menu. He didn't notice the child's shoe, tucked away in the corner of the booth, the faint pulsing light emanating from its sole. He didn't see the figure, standing just outside the diner window, its red eyes watching him, its skeletal face twisted in a silent promise. He didn't need to. The nightmare was over, but the memory lingered, a shadow in the back of his mind, a constant reminder that some roads are best left untraveled, some rest stops best avoided. He was safe for now, but he knew, deep down, that he would never truly escape the Pitstop Nightmare. It had marked him, changed him, leaving him forever haunted by the horrors that lurked in the shadows of the open road. Gap 3S, Section 10, The Unseen Passenger. As he climbed back into his truck, the familiarity of the cab brought a fleeting sense of normalcy. The engine roared to life, and he merged onto the highway, the miles stretching out before him like a promise of escape. But as the road rolled under his wheels, a chill settled in the air, a palpable reminder that he was not alone. The radio crackled with static, then silence, then a voice. A child's voice, singing a lullaby he couldn't quite place. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. He glanced at the passenger seat, empty, but for the faint outline of something, or someone, imprinted in the dust. The miles ticked by, each one a heartbeat, each one a reminder that the nightmare was far from over. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of those red eyes lurking in the shadows of the truck's sleeper cabin. He slammed the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt on the shoulder. He turned, breathless, but the cabin was empty. Only his own reflection stared back at him, eyes wide with fear. He knew he had to keep moving. The highway stretched on, an endless ribbon of asphalt, and he drove, driven by the need to escape the unseen passenger that haunted him. The laughter of the child echoed in the cab, a cruel reminder that some horrors cannot be outrun, only endured. As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight pierced the darkness, casting long shadows on the road ahead. He dared to hope that the light would banish the terror, that he could find peace in the new day. But he knew, deep down, that the unseen passenger was still with him, a silent, spectral presence that would forever haunt the open road. The nightmare had not ended. It had only just begun. The fog thickened, swallowing the truck in a shroud of gray, making the road ahead almost invisible. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a shadowy figure moving through the fog, an eerie silhouette that seemed to follow him. His heart pounded, eyes darting to the rearview mirror, searching for the source of his terror. The headlights cut through the fog, revealing the road ahead, but the sense of dread only grew stronger. A ghostly handprint appeared on the window, sending a shiver down his spine. He wiped the fogged-up window with a trembling hand, but the handprint remained, a chilling reminder of the unseen passenger. The road stretched on, an endless journey into the unknown, and he drove, knowing that the nightmare was far from over. The child's laughter echoed once more, a haunting melody that would forever linger in his mind. As the first light of dawn broke through the fog, he dared to hope that the new day would bring an end to his torment. But deep down, he knew that the unseen passenger would always be with him, a silent spectral presence that haunted the open road. The nightmare had not ended. It had only just begun. Gap 3S, Scene 11. Echoes of the past. Months had passed since that harrowing night on the highway. The truck driver had returned to his normal life, the routines of daily existence offering a semblance of stability. He found comfort in the mundane, in the predictable patterns of work, home, and sleep. The truck had been sold, replaced with a smaller, more manageable vehicle. He had even taken up a new job, one that kept him closer to home, to safety. But the past has a way of lingering, of seeping into the present like a slow, insidious poison. It started with small things, shadows flickering at the edge of his vision, the faint sound of a child's laughter echoing in an empty room. He dismissed them as tricks of the mind, remnants of a trauma that would fade with time. One evening, as he sat in his living room, the television flickering in the background, he heard it again. The lullaby, that haunting, unplaceable melody. He muted the TV, heart pounding in his chest. The sound persisted, growing louder, more insistent. He followed it to the source, the small storage room at the back of his house. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and forgotten memories. He flicked on the light, revealing the old belongings he had stored away. Among them, an old teddy bear, one he didn't recognize. Its eyes seemed to glint with a malevolent light, and as he reached out to touch it, the lullaby stopped. Silence hung heavy in the air, oppressive and suffocating. He backed out of the room, closing the door with trembling hands. The normalcy he had fought so hard to reclaim was unraveling, thread by fragile thread. The unseen passenger had found him again, its presence a shadow that clung to his every step. Days turned into nights, and the eerie occurrences grew more frequent. Lights flickered, objects moved on their own, and that chilling laughter echoed through the halls. He realized with a sinking dread that there was no escape, no sanctuary from the nightmare that had followed him home. As he lay in bed one night, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, he felt it. A weight on the mattress beside him, the outline of a small body pressing into the sheets. He didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. The lullaby started again, soft and haunting, and he knew. The unseen passenger was here to stay, a relentless specter that would forever haunt his every waking moment. The nightmare had not ended. It had simply taken on a new form, a new guise. And as the darkness closed in around him, he understood that some horrors are not bound by the road, they are bound to the soul. He stared out the window, knowing that the nightmare was far from over. The shadowy figure outside seemed to confirm his fears, a constant reminder of the horror that now defined his life. He closed the curtains, trying to shut out the darkness, but it was futile. The darkness was inside, a part of him, a relentless specter that would never let go. He clutched his head in despair, haunted by the unseen forces that had followed him home. Looking at a family photo, he realized the danger wasn't just to him, but to those he loved. With a newfound resolve, he knew he had to fight back, to protect his family from the nightmare that had become his reality. He prepared for the battle ahead, knowing it would be a fight for his very soul. As he faced the darkness, he was ready to confront his fears, to reclaim his life from the shadows. He stood tall, determined to overcome the unseen passenger that had haunted him for so long. Stepping into the light, he was ready to fight, to reclaim his life from the darkness. And in that moment, a glimmer of hope shone in his eyes, a promise of a future free from the nightmare. He walked into the light, leaving the darkness behind, ready to face whatever came next. Scene 12. Confronting the abyss. The relentless haunting had driven the truck driver to the edge of sanity. He knew he could not live in perpetual fear, could not allow this unseen terror to dominate his life. Determined to confront the source of his torment, he prepared himself for a final showdown. One stormy night, as thunder rumbled and lightning split the sky, he decided it was time. Clutching a flashlight and a small, leather-bound journal he had found in the storage room, he made his way to the basement. The journal had belonged to the previous owner, and within its pages were cryptic entries about a dark presence that had haunted the house for years. Descending into the basement, the air grew colder, the darkness more oppressive. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing cobwebs and forgotten relics of the past. At the far end of the basement, a heavy wooden door stood ajar, a faint light seeping through the crack. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. Inside, the room was filled with old toys, dusty furniture, and in the center, a large, ornate mirror. He approached the mirror, the journal's final entry echoing in his mind. The mirror holds the key. It is both the portal and the prison. As he stood before the mirror, his reflection seemed to waver, the glass rippling like water. The lullaby began to play, softly at first, then growing louder, more insistent. In the reflection, he saw a figure, a small child with hollow eyes and a haunting smile. The child reached out, and as their hands touched the glass, a surge of cold shot through him. He understood then that the child was the source, the origin of the nightmare. Summoning all his courage, he spoke to the reflection, his voice trembling. "What do you want?" The child's smile faded, and in a voice that was both young and ancient, it replied, "To be free." Realizing that the child was trapped, a victim of the same dark forces that had tormented him, he made a decision. He would break the mirror, shatter the portal, and release the spirit. With a swift motion, he swung the flashlight at the glass. It splintered with a deafening crash, shards flying in all directions. The room was plunged into darkness, the lullaby silenced. For a moment there was only the sound of his ragged breathing, then a soft whisper, "Thank you." The oppressive weight lifted, the air grew warmer, and he knew the spirit was finally at peace. He climbed the stairs back to the living room, the storm outside beginning to subside. The house felt different, lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. The unseen passenger was gone, the nightmare ended. But as he settled into his chair, exhausted but relieved, He couldn't shake the feeling that the battle had taken a toll on his soul. Some scars, he realized, never fully heal. And while the spirit was free, a part of the darkness would always remain within him, a silent reminder of the abyss he had faced. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, he closed his eyes, hoping that sleep would bring peace. But knowing, deep down, that the echoes of the past would always linger, a faint whisper in the back of his mind, a reminder of the terror that had once walked beside him, the end.